Okay, we are back in Esther chapter 7 today. We are flying away. By the way, I need a volunteer. You don't have to volunteer right now. You can think about it, pray about it, and then volunteer. But whenever we finish Esther, which is possibly going to be sooner than any of us thought, I want to do a traditional Purim celebration, sort of, which is you read the Esther scroll, which we will do, and then you eat traditional Jewish foods they have there. So there's a thing called Haman's Pockets, like a little pastry that they make. And if you are a pastry person and would like to make those pastries, let me know. I'll get you connected with some possible recipes, and then we can all read the story of Haman and Mordecai and eat pastries together, whatever is our last Wednesday. We won't finish today, won't finish next week, probably not the week after that, but at some point the end will come, and we're going to need to have sugary snacks to properly celebrate Esther and condemn Haman. So anyway, that'll be a good time. So let me know if you would be interested. If you want to have like competing recipes and you say, hey, we all want to try to make our own Haman's Pockets pastries, then you can do that. Just more food for all of us. But let me know if you're interested in that adventure. So last time we were together, 2 weeks ago, the text was really the Between the Banquets segment was what we were dealing with for a couple of weeks. So remember, the lead-in is the Esther is the queen of Persia, and her cousin Mordecai, who is basically her adoptive father, working at the king's gate, having some kind of royal position, tips off Esther about a plot to take the king's life, and Esther, without revealing her nationality or her family connection to Mordecai, says, hey, we found out that there's this plot against the king. And so sure enough, the plot was found out, and it was duly noted that Mordecai, the cousin of Esther, was responsible for turning in these conspirators against the king, but for whatever reason the king did nothing to honor Mordecai for this. Meanwhile, Haman, about whom we know nothing, is promoted by the king to be basically his prime minister, his vizier, his right-hand man. And all we know about Haman is that he comes from the line of the Amalekites, the line of Agag, and we know that Mordecai comes from the line of the Israelites, the line of Saul. So there's a whole history there. So when Haman gets the king to make a decree that all the king's officials at the king's gate have to bow down to him and honor him, Mordecai refuses to honor Haman, either for religious grounds or ethnic grounds or personal grounds or something such as this. And when Haman finds out that Mordecai won't honor him, Haman is very angry. Haman then tricks the king into making this decree. Haman has already cast the Purim, the Pur, to determine a date, and then he goes to the king and asks permission to wipe out a people that aren't in the king's best interest to keep alive. It's not worth the king's while to let these people live, Haman said to the king. And Haman also offered the king a huge amount of money, which tends to be influential on politicians then and now. And so the king irresponsibly gives Haman his signet ring, and Haman makes this decree that all of the Jews are to be wiped out in a period of about 11 months. Mordecai finds out. He begins mourning and wailing. Esther figures out that he's mourning and can't come into the palace grounds. She sends him some new clothes. He says new clothes are not enough. He explains the situation, and Esther's like, wait a minute, I can't go to the king because that's not supposed to happen. And basically Mordecai says, hey, if deliverance doesn't come from you, it'll come from someplace else. You're in this position for such a time as this. And so Esther says, okay, then you and all the Jewish people need to be fasting along with me and my maids as I get ready to go see the king. When Esther positioned herself to see the king, she was wearing her royal robe, so inwardly she's weak and fasting. Outwardly she's clothed with royal dignity. She manages to put herself where she can be seen by the king before she technically approaches him, and he actually calls her in. What's the deal, he asks, because he knows there's got to be a deal if she's taking the liberty of coming before him like this. And she says, if it pleases the king, if it's good to the king, and that's the same kind of language throughout Esther, what pleases the king is what happens. If it pleases the king, come to a banquet I've prepared for you and Haman. She manages to honor Haman without insulting the king, and they've got this private banquet of 3. And the king says, so what is it you want? And again, she says, if it pleases the king, if I found favor in your eyes, then come to another banquet tomorrow. and then I'll do the king's word. I'll give you what you wanted me to tell you that I was asking for. So she is able to frame things as though she's doing the king's will, she's doing the king's pleasure, the king's delight, when actually she's getting the king by coming to the second banquet to say that he's going to give her what she asked for. In between the banquets, what happened? Let's review that real quick. So Haman goes out from banquet number 1. How is Haman feeling after banquet number 1? Oh, yeah, he's really charged up, right? Right. Not only is everything wonderful about me as it was, but the queen invited me to a private banquet with her and the king. So my life is even better than it was. And so he's about ready to burst with this pride that he has about how great he is and how wonderful he is. And everybody loves me, and this is Haman and how he operates. But there's one fly in Haman's ointment, and what is that? Mordecai. He's on this cloud 9 coming out from banquet number 1, and Mordecai refuses to fear and tremble. Don't miss that. Refuses to fear and tremble in the presence of Haman. So Haman goes home to his wife and his friends and to console poor old Haman because Mordecai won't bow down to him or honor him. What does Haman's wife, what does Haman's wife suggest to Haman that he should do about this problem? Yeah, kill him in the morning and then go have a good banquet, right? What a great plan for tomorrow. And so it sounds good to Haman. So he erects an outrageously large apparatus, probably a spire, a stake of some kind on which to impale Mordecai. Some of our translations have gallows, but we've translated that based on later eras of capital punishment. The Assyrians like to impale people. And so build this big stake to impale him on, and then go ask the king's permission. Again, we notice Haman's order of operations. With the genocide of the Jews, his order of operations was roll the dice, figure out the date, and then you'll get the king's permission. Now it's build the execution device, and then go get the king's permission. But that night, while Haman apparently is busily building this device to kill Mordecai, what is the king's problem back at the palace? He can't sleep. And so, since he can't sleep, he chooses to have read to him what? Yeah, the records of my own achievements, right? Which I love that. I can't sleep, read to me what I've done. And they come to the passage where Mordecai had tipped off the king, through Esther, to this plot against his life. And the king says, what did we do to honor him? And the answer, awkwardly, is nothing. So now the king's got to save face and figure out a way to honor Mordecai. So as morning dawns in the capital of Susa, the king needs an advisor because this king doesn't make any decisions on his own. He needs an advisor to tell him what to do to the man he desires to honor. And meanwhile, Haman needs to get an audience with the king so he can get permission to execute Mordecai. They don't know that they each have Mordecai in mind. In this case, the king for honor and Haman for execution. So the king calls Haman in and says, what should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? And naturally, Haman assumes the king must be talking about, yeah, it must be me. What man in all the empire, from the Nile to the river Indus, could possibly be more worthy of the king's honor than me? And so he begins to describe this very extravagant procession, wearing the king's own garments, riding the king's own horse, receiving these royal accolades. I mean, this is as close as you can get to a I'm next in line for the throne type of thing. And it should be done by a member of the nobility. One of the king's highest officials should honor this even higher honor guy. And that's what should be done for the man you desire to honor. And so the king says, great, go do it for Mordecai. And so we have this comical picture of Haman leading Mordecai, his nemesis, throughout the capital city, saying, this is the man the king delights to honor. This is the man the king delights to honor. Over and over and over again. And he goes home for another pity party. He covers his head in mourning. So Esther and Mordecai mourn when their people are on the line. And Haman mourns when he's been humiliated. And he goes home and talks to his wife and his friends again. And his wife and his friends aren't so nearly as consoling this time. What do his wife and friends say? Anybody remember? Things are not looking good. If Mordecai is Jewish, you can't stand against him. So we have several places in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, where Gentiles confess effectively the invincibility of Israel because of Israel's God at different points, and this will be one of those points. So his wife and friends, far from comforting, now saying, you will fall. The word for fall in the Hebrew text shows up 3 times in that sentence. You won't be able to stand against him. You're going to fall, fall, fall. And that was what happened. And then all of a sudden the king's eunuchs come in to rush Haman off to banquet number 2. And just like banquet number 1, he's going in a hurry, but his countenance has decidedly changed by this point in the story. That was your recap of what we did a couple of weeks ago. Any questions about that part of the story? Yes. Yeah. Liz is saying she can only imagine how awkward the parade through the streets was. Have you been in an awkward situation? Well, Haman was definitely in an awkward situation. That was a humble pie situation for Haman. And meanwhile, his enemy is still alive and has made a mockery of him. And now he's going back to this banquet. Other questions or observations about Haman, Mordecai, Esther, any of this so far? Well, let's read chapter 7 then. How about for now just verses 1 through 4? Esther 7 verses 1 through 4. This is banquet number 2, and Sandy has it for us.
So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? Am I supposed to go to the second day?
Yeah, you're doing great.
It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. And then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. So the king and Haman, they've been together before. We might remember they were together and drinking after the decree went out to annihilate the Jews. And remember, the whole city is just in shock. Like, this is just puzzling. Why did this decree come out? And meanwhile, King and Haman were drinking back in chapter 3. Now they go in to have another banquet with Queen Esther. The word for banqueting or dining or feasting here is the word that means drinking. And there's been a whole lot of drinking in the book of Esther. And so in context, it means have a banquet. That's a fine translation. But again, the word for drinking is here. And it's, again, while they're drinking wine that this happens. So a lot of lubrication has been occurring for the king and for Haman. Again, Esther is called queen here. That language has begun to appear about Esther as we move through the book of Esther, so emphasizing her royal status and how the king is viewing her and treating her. So they're drinking wine. This is the second day, banquet number 2. All that has happened in the last 24 hours has been kind of crazy. And the king asks a second time. Notice again, he asks the language of what's your petition, what's your request, and promises twice to give it to her. Remember, the way she phrased the invite to banquet number 2, let's go back to that, chapter 5. The way she phrased the invite to banquet number 2, Esther 5, verses 7 and 8. How about that? Esther 5, verses 7 and 8. Steve on the front row has that. Steve in the front row, not Steve in the second row. Steve in the front row was just barely ahead of Steve in the second row. But you can be next. That's right. Go for it, Steve. 7 and 8 of chapter 5, yeah. Chapter 5, verse 7 and 8.
This is my request and deepest wish. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what this is all about.
There we go. Then literally, I will do the king's word. So the king had already hurried off Haman to banquet number 1. Let's go do the word of Esther. And now she's saying, if it's pleasing to you to grant my petition for your request, then come to the banquet. And the coming will be an indication of your desire to do what I ask. So she's really got the king in her will here now, doing what she wants him to do. And he loves banquets. He loves eating. He loves drinking. So sure, come eat and drink some more. Sounds good to me. And then I'll do what you say, meaning I'll share with you my petition, my request. So the same language is used repeatedly in chapter 5 and repeatedly again here in chapter 3. If what's your petition, what's your request? And again, the extravagant offer up to half the kingdom may be a formality, or maybe the king, again, being a little bit over the top, as he has been over the top a number of times. But I will do what you've asked of me. So chapter 7, verse 3, look what Esther emphasizes again. If I have found favor, and if it pleases your majesty, literally, if it is good to you. So the same kind of language we've had repeatedly throughout Esther. If it's good to the king, if it pleases the king, it happens. And what is her petition and what is her request? Yeah, my petition is my life and my people are my request. At this point in the story, what is the king making of this request? This is not in the text, but what is he thinking at this point? Spare her life, spare her people.
Well, first of all, he didn't know
Right.
that she was
Right, right. He seems to be clueless about at least one of these two facts. Either clueless that Esther is Jewish, or clueless that Haman's decree is against the Jews. Or maybe both those things. He doesn't understand this request. This is not on his radar. He was not expecting this. How does Esther describe the plight of her people in verse 4? The first part of verse 4 especially. We have been sold. That's been emphasized twice here. Go back to chapter 3, verse 9. Esther 3:9. Actually, let's back up to verse 8 just for fun. How about that? This is Haman giving his sales pitch to the king about his plan to annihilate the Jews. And Steve on the second row can have this one if he wants it. Esther 3, 8, and 9. Esther 3, 8, and 9.
And Haman said to King Xerxes, there are certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples of all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate this. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for the men who carry out this decree.
Yeah, so you see this is a two-pronged request here. Number one, you have these people that are different, they're strange, and they don't keep the king's laws. Keeping in mind that up to this point, the only law of the king that has been broken by anybody who's Jewish is that Mordecai won't bow down and honor Haman. Mordecai actually saved the king's life, so I think Mordecai is loyal to the king. But anyway, Haman has made the case. It's a people group. They're not loyal to the king. It's not in the king's best interest to put up with them. That same phrase in Hebrew will show up in our verse we're looking at here in chapter 7. So if it pleases the king, if it's good to the king, there's that language again. Let there be a decree to destroy them, and by the way, I'll pay you lots and lots of money to do this. So that was what happened before. So the emphasis is the people have been sold for money. Chapter 4, verse 7. This is Mordecai explaining to Esther via a messenger what has happened. Esther 4, verse 7. Who would like that? John, thank you.
Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money the king had promised to pay in the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews.
Okay, so Hathatch goes back with this information to Esther from Mordecai, including the fact that there was a payment made to get the king to do this decree. And so when we come to chapter 7, when Esther, out of the blue as far as the king is concerned, says, my petition is my life, my request is the life of my people, she says, we have been sold for destruction, slaughter, annihilation, the same triplet of words that Haman himself had used back in chapter 3, proposing his decree. We have been sold for destruction. Yes, Liz.
So, I mean, the king, he may not even realize, I mean, because I just remember reading that before, the king didn't even tell him it was the Jews? Like,
No, no. From the text, we never find out whether Xerxes knew whether the Jews are the people that Haman had in mind. Xerxes at least comes across as extraordinarily irresponsible and not doing his fact-checking. Theoretically, if you're the king of an empire and somebody wants to wipe out a segment of your empire, you ought to be asking some follow-up questions. But he doesn't do that. He just takes Haman's word for granted. So again, part of the caricature of Ahasuerus, Xerxes, in Esther is that he's a pretty incompetent, bumbling ruler who doesn't look into things well. He's drunk, whatever seems good to him, whatever his advisors say sounds good to me, and he has not looked into this matter. So he just doesn't know who it is being eliminated. And keep in mind, it's been emphasized multiple times, for whatever reason, Esther was not to reveal her ethnic background or her connection to Mordecai. And so we get the idea she has also kept that secret, at least from the higher ups. Her people seem to know now, like her maids and those sort of people have been fasting with her. But the king is clueless about these crucial pieces of background information about which people group he's agreed to annihilate, and that his queen is a part of that group. So, yeah. Yes, Todd.
Might be a small detail or whatever, but where's, 10,000 talents of silver is a lot of
Right,
silver.
right. A lot of money, 10,000 talents of silver. There's some thinking that that's an exaggerated number, like a lot of the figures may be in
Well, I was
Esther.
wondering, is Haman doing this on credit?
Yeah, there you go. Is Haman on credit? Maybe he is.
Because
Yeah.
we get to plunder them after we kill them.
Right,
And,
right.
it's part of the bid, you start.
There you go. So maybe,
Sell some of the silver off to Haman.
there you go. So maybe Haman's promise of silver comes from the plunder. It's going to come from the Jewish people. Maybe so, yeah. I don't know. What we do know is it's an extraordinary amount of money. And as soon as, this king doesn't think much beyond hormones, taste buds, wallet. So if it's good for any of those things or all three, he's on board. And so the money is part of the deal here. They've been sold. This language for being sold, which Esther uses here in chapter 7, is used other places in the Hebrew scriptures, and sometimes money is not involved. Sometimes to be sold over to a people group, there was no actual transaction, but you're given into bondage, you're given into some kind of oppression, that sort of thing. So sold doesn't necessarily require that. At this point in the Bible, though, we've already had Joseph has been sold into slavery, and there are several echoes of Joseph's story here. And of course, most famously in the New Testament, Jesus will be sold for 30 pieces of silver. So this idea of the people of God being sold, being given over, being betrayed, happens again and again. Other questions or comments? Is that raise a hand or just a, okay. Yeah, just a yawn, okay. Anyway, so we've been sold for destruction, slaughter, annihilation, same terms that Haman himself used. The last half of chapter, of verse 4, I should say, Esther 7, verse 4. The last half of verse 4 is sticky to translate. And I came across about a half a dozen, maybe 7 different ways of translating that in the commentaries I was reading yesterday. So let's have a couple different people read that. I think Sandy read the NIV. Do we have a footnote alternate reading for the NIV of verse 4? Anybody have that footnote alternate reading?
Quiet, but the compensation of our adversary offers cannot be compared with the loss the king would suffer.
Okay, so the compensation our adversary has offered you would not compare with the loss the king would suffer. That's one way of translating. Anybody have New Revised Standard? By chance? I'll go ahead and read that one. It says, no enemy can compensate for the damage to the king who has New Living. You have that on the front here? Liz has it. Go for it.
If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing.
Okay, those readings so far get the sense of it. Some have taken this to the idea that it wouldn't be worth bothering the king if we were just being sold as slaves, but rather this is a bigger deal. But the other line of translation, we've heard a couple examples of that, really is that the adversary here, the enemy here, can't possibly repay the king for what it's going to cost the king. And it seems to me that no matter how you translate that last half phrase, the emphasis is on what has happened is costly to the king. What has happened here is costly to the king. The word adversary or the word adversity is the same word. We don't know how to translate it here. Is it distress? Is it enemy? We don't really know. Could go either way there. But the general sense of it is this is worth the king's trouble because this is going to cost the king more so than if we'd simply been sold as slaves. The slaves thing even is a little bit ambiguous. The word slaves can mean actual slaves, but sometimes In the Persian Empire, for example, the nobles who served the king were called slaves of the king, and they weren't actually slaves. She may be saying it would have been no big deal for us to serve the king, which would be a repudiation of Haman's accusation that these people don't do the king's laws and don't honor the king, because she's saying that wouldn't have been the big deal. But the issue here is our annihilation will be costly to the king, and nothing that the enemy can repay you would actually make it up to you. So there's a lot of boring technical Hebrew things I don't understand about that last half of the sentence. But the bottom line is no matter how we translate it, Esther is emphasizing something has been done that will cost the king. Meaning, the person who has developed this plan to kill me and my people is doing something that's at the direct expense of the king, and therefore is effectively treasonous toward the king. So she is framing this in the way that it's not just about me and my people suffering. This is worth bringing to the king's attention. And the same language in the Hebrew phrasing that we saw back in Haman's argument, it's not worth your time to let these people live, is the same kind of phrase we have here. This is not going to be worthwhile to the king to have this happen. It's going to be costly to the king. So the calculus is what is of most benefit to the king. And apparently it's not just his queen possibly being taken from him, which will be the second time that an advisor's advice would have cost him a queen, but it's also this matter of these people as a whole are of value to you, and this is going to be costly to you, and the amount of money you've been offered is not going to make it up to you. It's probably what's implied by that last half of the verse, but it is a little bit sticky to translate it. Questions about that? Yes, Sandy.
So, I mean, if she is alluding to like his economic things getting done in his kingdom, and you take them out, it's
Yeah.
gonna mess up your whole kingdom.
Yes, she's implying it'll be costly to the king to have the death of this people group. If they were still slaving away as an empire or something, that might be one thing. But no, this is not going to be profitable to him to lose this group of people. Which he should have thought of before. There was a lot of speculation. Why did Haman add the bribe to his logic of getting the king to agree with this back in chapter 3? Why did Haman add the bribe? And it could well be that had the king sold them as slaves, he would have made profit. Or had the king kept them alive, it would have been profitable for him to have them alive in his empire. These are bodies who do work and pay taxes. And so there's an idea, an acknowledgement already in Haman's bribe that the king needs to get something out of this. There has to be something in this for the king. And now basically what Esther's insinuating one way or the other, depending on how you translate it, is this is too costly to the king for me to not bring this up. If it were just a matter of me and my people, I wouldn't bring it up. I'm bringing it up because it's in the king's interest to deal with this issue. This is costly to the king. Other questions or comments about that? She's extremely smart. She is brilliant. She is, Esther has played this. She got the king to call her in when he saw her, basically. She has reminded the king of her royal status without gloating about it. Right. She has gotten Haman in the audience without offending the king, and while duping Haman and thinking that he's loved by the queen. She has angled the whole thing, even though the king is starting to change his tone in chapter 5. Let's hurry and go do the word of Esther. She is saying, if it's good to the king, if it pleases the king, if it delights the king, my petition, my request, if I found favor, this kind of language. And we know she finds favor with everybody throughout this book. And so she's worked it that way. She's gotten him to come, and by coming, essentially agree to give what she asked for. And she has played this off not as her own people suffering, but as something which is costly to the king has happened. And so you need to know about this, Your Majesty, not just because of me and my people, but because of you and your best interest. And we all know that Xerxes, Ahasuerus, loves his own best interest. And so that's... in a good way. She is manipulative in a good way. She is politically astute. She knows how to work things in the court of Susa, and she has put things right where she wants them. Yeah, she knows how to read the room. I mean, this is the thing, but so we are, though, backing up theologically, we know that fasting has been going on leading into this by Mordecai, by the Jews in Susa, and by Esther, and her maids, her attendants, even the ones who apparently aren't Jewish. We know there's been fasting. We know biblically, broadly, that fasting and prayer and humility is actually a position of strength. When we humble ourselves before the Lord, He's intervening. So we are getting the implication here. It's not been stated, but the implication is that Esther is brilliant because she's gotten wisdom from the Lord to do this, even though it's not been stated anywhere in the text. That's our assumption as to the logic here, especially because of Mordecai's own language, such a time as this, and if you don't step up here, deliverance will come from someplace else. There's a theological conviction. Theological conviction is whispered under the surface here the whole time. And Esther is absolutely brilliant politically here, and we get the idea this is wisdom because of the prayer, the fast in the morning, the trusting in the God of Israel, which is implied here, not stated.
Has Mordecai been giving her advice too?
Yeah, Mordecai definitely gave her some advice along the way, but we don't know how much of this plan is Mordecai's plan. When you get the idea here, when things shifted there, back when Mordecai made Esther to be aware of what was going on in chapter 4, things shifted after Mordecai says, such a time as this, you've come to power, now it's time to go. Then when she says, okay, Mordecai, go and get all the Jews to fast for me, now she's giving the orders and he is cooperating. Not that their relationship was never adversarial, Mordecai and Esther, but you get the idea. She is running things now, and she's definitely running things. Remember the panic. The panic at the end of chapter 1 was the women are going to rebel, and the men aren't going to have a chance. And now we find that Haman's wife and the king's queen, Esther, are the two that are running the show here in these middle chapters of the book, especially an emphasis on Esther.
I just think of like the phrase, like she's got favor with God and with man, like.
Yeah.
And obviously the Lord is giving her wisdom, but I also just wonder if the palace people, the eunuchs and the maids, and like people that knew the king are also kind of saying, this is how he is, this would be a good strategy, or helping her.
Yeah.
Like it just seems like everybody
Right.
loves her.
So in addition to the speculation that Mordecai may have given Esther some advice for this process, Liz is saying Esther has had favor here all the way on through. The eunuch in charge of the women, and then all the other people in the palace, her process of going through that beauty pageant, whatever you want to call it, where she was in that contest to please the king. Everybody she came in contact, she found favor, she won favor in their eyes, so they like her. So it invites the idea that the Lord is providing wisdom for Esther through these other people in whose eyes he has given her favor. The Lord has given Esther favor in the eyes of all these people she comes across. And we'll get a hint of that in the end of our chapter here today, because it turns out that as much as the people in the palace know Xerxes and how to play him, they also know Haman and they don't like him. And that comes up here again. It's understandable that Haman would be a not likable guy, but we'll get more of that here in just a few verses. Any other comments before we dig into verse 5? Yes, Sandy.
Who brought up favor in the eyes of God, so everything's going well? That's how it went for Joseph.
Yes. Sandy is saying favor in the eyes of God and the people. That's how it went for Joseph. And we have a lot of echoes here in the Esther story of Joseph. You think about the process of being sold, the process of becoming this royal official, right-hand man of the Pharaoh, the need for God to intervene on his behalf. He's in a bad way, and Joseph gets all this favor. And so it is that really Esther's story echoes Joseph's story at many points, to the point where we suspect that the author of Esther is deliberately making those allusions. He's having fun. I think it was Sherry said it's almost like a cartoon at some place here. He's having fun telling this story in a way that not only entertains, but also draws upon the rich history of the Hebrew tradition, what God has done for God's people. And that's the way it's to be taken here for sure. How about so it's still chapter 7 now. How about verses 5 through 10? 5 through 10. All right, Jamie, thank you.
Who would do such a thing to Xerxes and Haman? Who would be so presumptuous as to touch him? Esther replied, this wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy. Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. In despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king was returning from the palace garden. The king exclaimed, will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes? And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. Then impale Haman on it, the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided.
No, we've had a turning of the tables now, haven't we? So the king's question is, who and where is this guy who would have, and the expression has to do with his heart was full of such a thing. Such a thing was in his heart. Who and where is this guy who would have this in his heart to do such a thing, to wipe out my queen and her people at great cost to me? Who is this man? And then Esther, and it's redundant here, adversary, enemy, the wicked Haman. And so you have these three things that are going to happen: annihilate, kill, destroy to the Jews. And now we have the three things: adversary, enemy, wicked Haman. And again, Haman has been introduced here to us already in Esther as the enemy of the Jews. And by the way, the word for adversary here is the same word from verse 4 that is either adversity or adversary. It's either distress or enemy. And that same word is used of Haman again here in chapter 6. He's the one who's not worthwhile to the king, not in the king's best interest. And so it's Haman. And so now we know why she has him in the banquet right here. So there's no post-game press conference, there's no triangulation afterward. There's just, here's the guy, and right here before you, king, and that's just going to, speed up the whole bureaucratic process here of having things advanced along. How does Haman react? Back half of 6. How does Haman react? He's terrified. So remember that Haman was angry with Mordecai for not fearing and trembling in his presence. And now we have Haman fearing and trembling in the presence of the king and the queen. That irony is deliberately accentuated here. The man who wanted people to cower before him is now the one doing the cowering. And so that layer has also flipped around. And the king, meanwhile, what's the king's reaction to this whole thing? Ticked off and leaves. And there's been great speculation here as to what the specifics are. We know he gets up and leaves in a hurry and he's angry. He's been drinking a lot of wine. Maybe he has to go to the bathroom. That was one of the suggestions. Right? Yeah, he leaves his wine. He's angry if he leaves that wine. That's right. That's exactly right. That's great, Nancy. He leaves his wine. He's so angry he leaves. If he were thinking, he would have taken the wine with him. He could drink more on the run, right? But he leaves the wine. Well, he's really out of it now. Maybe he's feels so betrayed by Haman, who he has been so kind to. Something about he's so angry. It was his queen. He already lost one queen at the advice of one advisor, and now he's going to lose another queen. We don't know totally the dynamics of the rage here, but the king is angry. So keep in mind, the king was angry after Vashti refused to come into his banquet in chapter 1. By the way, it goes the opposite direction. The king's banquet was outside in the garden in chapter 1, and the women were inside, and he called Vashti to come out, and she wouldn't. Now he's had this indoor banquet, and now he is going out into the garden, the side of the old banquet, in his rage when this won't happen. So he's back out in the palace garden, if you will. And by the way, I'm told their gardens were very extravagant in these Persian palaces. But he leaves his wine, and he goes out there into the garden. And Haman, what does Haman decide to do? Beg Esther. He's been reduced to begging Esther. And maybe he still has some glimmer of hope that, she invited me to the banquet. Maybe she's a softie. Maybe he's desperate here. He doesn't have many options left. He really has one option left. So he's begging, and he begs in what posture? He falls down on her couch, right? So don't picture our couch. Picture some kind of fancy royal Persian reclining couch. A lot of ancient peoples reclined while eating. Jesus and the disciples, for example, didn't have the couches, but they were on the floor, probably propped up with one arm and eating with the other. So they're reclining, and he says she's still on her couch where she's been. And he may not fall on top of the couch, but falls before the couch. My understanding is there were enough rules where the moment the king leaves the room, Haman is almost assuredly in trouble. You were supposed to stay 7 paces away, according to one of my sources, 7 paces away from the king's wife, as it was anyway. And so she was off limits. So for him to be begging at the foot of her couch is grossly inappropriate conduct for any man in the empire, period, Haman or not. And so this is a bad place for him to be found when the king comes back in. The king interprets this how? Yes, sexual assault on the queen while he was out of the room. There is some question here as to whether the king is that dumb that he thinks that that's what Haman is doing right now. He's drunk, he's angry, we know that. Or was the king actually doing something intelligent here? By leaving the room, he puts Haman in a bad spot here, and then coming back in, he can accuse Haman of trying to come on to the queen, which if you make a sexual approach to the queen in those days, it's essentially a claim to the throne. And so by coming again, he is now going to be able to quickly and swiftly condemn Haman for something that everybody agrees is wrong, without bringing up the fact that Haman duped me into a foolish decree against the Jewish people and this sort of thing. So yeah, we don't, Jamie's like, he's not that smart. So one way or the other, though, now the accusation has been made, whether ingenuously or disingenuously, Haman is going to be in trouble. Keep in mind, Haman's accusations against the Jewish people were largely false. I mean, the only decree they ever violated was Mordecai wouldn't bow down to Haman. But now we have Haman, who we know is not actually trying to sexually assault the queen. He's going to be condemned for something he did not in fact do. So even that injustice it's a just injustice, if you will. It gets flipped on its head there. He's falling on the couch. Will he even molest the queen while she's with me in the house, which is highly audacious if that was actually happening. And so as soon as the word leaves the king's mouth, again, the word is so important here. The word of the king, the word of Queen Esther, for that matter, is so important throughout this book. And now the word comes out, and immediately after the word comes out of the king's mouth, what do they do to poor Haman at the end of verse 8? They cover his face. The last time Haman's face was covered was when? He covered his own face when? Anybody remember? When he got home from the whole charade of having to honor Mordecai, he covers his face in shame, in mourning, because he's been humiliated, and now his face is covered because he has been condemned. I'm told, we don't have any evidence of this practice in the Persian Empire outside of this text, but we do know that the Greeks and Romans in different cases would actually cover the faces of those that they condemned, and so this fits within that template. They're covering his face. He's not fit to look at anymore, and he's going to be in trouble. Meanwhile, verse 9, Harbona comes back on the scene. We met Harbona back in chapter 1. Harbona was one of the eunuchs, I believe, who was sent to go get Queen Vashti. Esther 1, verse 10. Let's see. Yeah. Verse 10 of chapter 1, the king is merry with wine, and we know that's always a red flag when the king is merry with wine. And he sends Harbona and Bigtha, possibly one of the conspirators, Bigthana and Teresh. Bigtha is a variant of the same name. But Harbona is one of that group of eunuchs who goes to get the queen. Of course, she won't come. So now we come back here to 7, verse 9, and we meet Harbona again. Harbona, one of the eunuchs who attends to the king. And Harbona seems to be very, very, very ready and eager to share a certain piece of information. What is that piece of information? There's this pole outside whose house? Haman's house, and Haman had erected it for whom? For Mordecai. Mordecai, who literally spoke a good word about the king. Mordecai's good word to save the king's life at the end of chapter 2, which was remembered by the king at the beginning of chapter 6, and they read his annals. So the Mordecai who spoke a good word was supposed to be executed on this big pole in Haman's yard. Haman was going to have you kill the guy who looked out for your own interest. So you see the king's getting angry and angrier here. This guy who looked out for me was about to be killed by the guy who was actually costly to me, and my queen has just foiled the whole plot. And so all too eager is Harbona, the eunuch, saying, hey, it just happens to be that Haman had this made for Mordecai. It's ready to go at his house. And it's just too perfect. And this gives us the idea that no one in the palace liked Haman. You know, it may have been, this helps us interpret, by the way, back in chapter 3, where Mordecai is refusing to bow, and these different people from the royal officials are saying, why are you not bowing? It's almost like he has the audacity to do what they themselves weren't willing to do. That's one way to read it. The other way to read it is they're conspiring against him too. But anyway, Harbona at least does not care for Haman and does care for Mordecai and is all too eager. So we've got this picture that's been building here, all the go-betweens between Mordecai and Esther throughout the chapters here. You get the idea there's a network who loves those two, and now we have a very eager pointing out this is available to kill him. Yes.
It looks like he was listening at the door.
Yeah. It's like he was listening at the door. I just happen to have a solution. That lends to the idea that some of these people in the palace are in on what Esther is doing and well aware of it. And so he just happens to stroll right in and say, hey, I've got this piece of information for you, king. And so the king says, affix him to it. You know, you put him on that pole, and
Let's go eat.
that's right. That's right. Let's go eat and drink some more, right? So they go and they hang him on the very device he prepared to kill Mordecai. And then the king's anger calmed down. At 10 o'clock sharp, the king's anger calmed down. Impressions about this passage, Esther chapter 7.
So it seems like from the moment the king left the room, Haman believed that was it for him.
Yeah.
And then, like, even when the king hasn't even said anything yet, he just says, oh, is he going to tell the queen? And the attendants just cover the face. Like, it's
Right.
almost like everybody kind of knows
Right.
right away before he even actually says to kill him.
Yeah. People know the moment he says, will this man molest the queen? Everybody knows that's death penalty stuff. They're ready to go. They're ready to spring into action. But Haman knows he's in trouble the moment the king goes out in a rage. And he knows his only hope is to beg for Esther to do something. And unfortunately, his posture of begging only serves to seal his fate.
He didn't even think he could try to persuade him. You know, like, I mean, he's been manipulative too throughout.
That's exactly right.
It's almost like he's in a panic and can't think straight.
The weasel has run out of ideas, hasn't he? Yeah, that's what Haman has done. He doesn't have anything else that he can do to convince the king, and he just begs before the queen. And she's, of course, not going to be inclined to do anything for him at this point. Justice is being done here. And as has been indicated, implied, the Lord is delivering his people. You're in this position for such time as this. Haman's own wife, if Mordecai is of the Jewish people, you will fall, and you can't overcome him. And so these things are coming to pass. So we are cheering on the theology of what's happening behind the scenes here.
And I think this falls under the rubric too, what goes around comes around.
Yes.
And
Yeah, what goes around comes around for
in
sure.
serious ways.
Yes, this is definitely wisdom literature expanded here, because a lot of times in the Proverbs we have this idea where you exalt yourself, you'll be humbled. You know, this is the thing. So Haman is the quintessential fool, the self-exalting, arrogant, self-promoting guy, and continues to look really bad here, and then finally gets what's coming to him. This is one of the things we see is that really Haman is the same as the king, flying into rage, getting drunk, doing whatever is good in his own eyes, and he falls to the same. I mean, the king hasn't fallen yet, of course, but this is the kind of fate that comes to everybody who operates. It's about your ego, your anger, your pleasure, and your conniving, I guess. And this is what happens.
Xerxes is doing the quote-unquote right thing here. It still seems like it's still all about him. Like, hasn't all this kind of been framed to him as if, like, Haman is maybe going to try to usurp the throne? Like, he's costing you king, and he's trying to assault your queen.
Yes. Yes.
What he thinks would be honorable for the one the king wants to honor.
Right, that's a good point. So Liz is saying, lest we assign too many positive motivations to the king here. I mean, the king's love for Esther was a sexual pleasure kind of love. It wasn't necessarily I love her deeply, because he goes apparently 30 days without seeing her, this kind of thing. And the king's desire to save Esther and her people may not be as strong as the king's desire to not be shamed. The king has been shamed in this process. The fact that the king has been duped into agreeing to the wipeout of his queen and her people, that is dishonoring to the king. He has been dishonored. And Esther has framed this, it's not worth your while here. This is costly to you, king. And now with Haman making a move, or so it would appear, on the queen, that's a grab for the throne. And now that he finds out that he's putting things together here probably. Haman wanted this extravagant parade for Haman. He gets the idea that Haman was a threat to him. And so we really don't have any reason to believe that the king had any motivations other than looking out for the king here, although he definitely has some measure of outrage on behalf of Esther and what's going on. But yes.
And really, Haman moving on the queen is probably the last card he had to play.
That's right. That's right.
It was-
Yeah, that Haman's move on the queen was his last card, and though he was not actually trying to molest her, it had the appearance of that. That's good enough. That clenches it. At this point in the story, the king is not inclined to give Haman a fair trial.
Doesn't sound like
Yeah, right. So,
That kind of goes back to the Joseph story too, because, that queen kind of made it look like Joseph had tried to molest her.
yes, so that was the wife of Potiphar who lied about the sexual impropriety that actually Joseph steadfastly refused not to do. So even that's another layer of the Joseph story that kind of comes in thematically to this one, for sure. Any other impressions, comments, questions today? Yes, Karen.
Probably, and then just in something, probably someplace in there too, the king was thinking, what else is this man done? Because I gave him my signature.
Yes. What else has this man done? Yeah, we're certainly invited to see that in the anger, because the king is having some light bulbs firing off here in this chapter. And so what else is he connecting about the dots about that Haman has done? And we don't know, but he's had the last straw here. This guy has to go. And all too conveniently, Harbona says, "Why happen to know a place you can get rid of him?" So we get the idea that Haman's popularity was not wide and deep, for sure.
One about all the servants, I didn't think that the servants there in the castle had a high regard for the king.
Yeah, we don't know whether the servants in the castle care much for the king either.
I mean-
They know what's good for him, right?
Yeah.
Right. But we don't know how they think about the king. We know that Esther has found widespread favor in the palace. We know that there were multiple people who were going back and forth between Esther and Mordecai to help with that communication. And so by implication, we know that they're aware of the family connection between Esther and Mordecai. They're aware of this outrageous decree. They're certainly aware of Haman's arrogance, because who could be within 100 feet of Haman and not be aware of Haman's arrogance, right? And so these kind of things, you get the idea. In the empire, there's the official royal people, and there's everybody else. And everybody else may have a different view on life than the official royal people. That would not be a new thing. Yes?
I'm still coming back to this idea of Xerxes' motivation is himself, and I wonder if there's if he's feeling like he's finally putting it together that he made a bad decision, maybe from the beginning with Haman, possibly, and so he's feeling ashamed, and look at what's going on, and so this is to try to kind of suppress any shame that he might be feeling, so it's still kind of a self.
So that's an interesting thing. So seeing Xerxes' reaction here as a response to his own shame, it's a shame to Xerxes that he ever promoted Haman. It's to the shame of Xerxes he ever agreed with Haman's plan to wipe out the Jews. And so sometimes when we're ashamed and we're embarrassed, we respond in anger. Maybe not righteous anger, maybe just I was fooled anger. And that certainly plays into the text here. Certainly, yeah.
Okay, I'll just kill Haman and then I'll feel better.
Yeah, kill Haman, feel better,
Yeah,
you know?
that makes everything.
And then maybe have another banquet and feel more better, right? I mean, that's his way. That's his way of operating. So we're going to have to deal. We've resolved one problem. Haman, the enemy of the Jews, has been taken care of. We have not yet resolved the problem that this decree has been issued for people to go kill the Jews and take their stuff on the day that the Purim said was the day to do this. And so we're going to have to resolve that problem next week in chapter 8. I think chapter 8 is long enough. We'll probably spend all of next week in chapter 8. So we're at least 3 or 4 weeks away from the Hamantash and the Haman's pockets. If you say, Nathan, I am an expert at pastry production, or you would like to become one, let me know, and you can. There's actually other items on the menu traditionally for Purim too. So if we want to go all out, we can find more things. But we at least have to have Haman's pockets, and that mocks the fact that Haman offered money to do all this against the Jews, and so you eat Haman's pockets as part of the fun of the whole celebration. So let me know if you want to be a pastry person for that. Let's pray, and then we'll go. Lord, we thank you for this story. I pray you help us continue to think about our own hearts in this. where are we like the king, like Haman? Where are we like Esther, like Mordecai? What are you calling us to do? How are you calling us to respond to this passage? And I pray for a deepening of our faith and a confidence that you are the God who always acts finally to deliver your people, and we thank you that's the verdict for us. I pray your blessing on this day would be your faithful witnesses, and that we'd be full of your grace and bring you glory in that way. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. This is almost too much fun to be Bible study, isn't it? So, all right. Well, I am going to say goodbye to the online crowd. I have turned purple again today. That's fun. We'll figure out how long ago that happened. I'll say goodbye to the online crowd, and we'll see you next Wednesday.